In a dimly lit room, the tension was palpable. Alice leaned closer to Emily, her voice barely above a whisper.
It's okay, Emily. It's just accompanying for drinks, nothing more. You need the money, don't you?
Emily's face showed a hint of embarrassment. She hesitated, unwilling to agree.
I do need the money, but this feels like crossing a line.
Alice's patience was wearing thin.
This is a one-time opportunity. The client tonight is easygoing. I wouldn't set you up.
Emily gritted her teeth and nodded.
All right, I'll go tonight.
She couldn't delay any longer, this money was her lifeline. But when she arrived at the private room that evening, Emily regretted her decision. Her client tonight looked very tall and somewhat familiar from behind. Emily's heart skipped a beat as she walked over in silence.
Sir, what can I do for you?
She had been selling drinks here for a while, but this was her first time accompanying a client. Emily blushed deeply, almost too embarrassed to look up at him. The man remained silent. When Emily finally looked up, she only saw his resolute jawline.
Can you accept any request I make?
His voice carried a hint of malice as he scrutinized her with obvious disdain. Emily shivered, trembling with fear.
No, sir, I'm just here to accompany you for drinks.
Alice had said it would only involve some drinking.
Since you're here, why pretend to be so virtuous? Don't you know what comes after the drinks?
His words were full of insinuations, but Emily had no intention of compromising herself. Her face turned pale, and she almost wanted to run out the door.
I'm sorry, I just need 200,000. I don't need to compromise myself.
200,000. Emily, do you love money so much that you're willing to compromise yourself?
He took off his sunglasses, revealing a handsome face. It was James.
James?
Emily's blood nearly froze. She turned to run, but James grabbed her hand and pulled her back, pressing her against the door.
Why run now that you're here? What? Did you spend all the money my mom gave you and now want to earn it yourself? Who's the unlucky guy you're trying to deceive this time?
His mocking words cut Emily deeply, like sharp knives.
Let me go.
If she had known the client was James, she wouldn't have come here for anything.
Since you're here, don't think about leaving. Aren't you here to compromise yourself? How can you leave without making a deal?
Emily looked at the man she loved deeply, tears streaming down her face. It had been 5 years. She thought she had forgotten James, but seeing him now, she was still shaken. However, Emily knew James no longer loved her. Even now, as he tried to force her, there was no affection in his actions.
Don't do this. I don't love you anymore. What's the point of forcing me?
The man's actions stopped, his face darkening ominously. He looked at Emily with a stormy expression.
There's no point in forcing you. You want money, right? Beg me, and I'll give you money.
I'm sorry, I won't do this deal.
With that, she pushed the man away and ran. This time, James didn't stop her. He just watched her retreating figure with a dark, frightening expression. Emily ran and cried, her clothes torn by James, making her look disheveled. People on the street whispered as she passed, but Emily didn't care. 5 years, and she still couldn't sever this emotional tie. But what could she do? She had taken $1 million from James's mother and left him, becoming a vain woman who abandoned love for money, just like in all those cliched stories. But her father was diagnosed with cancer after she graduated high school, and each chemotherapy session required a lot of money. She had no mother since childhood, and her father had worked hard to raise her and put her through college. How could she ignore her father? Between love and family, Emily chose family. She had given up on this relationship 5 years ago and didn't dare to hope for anything more. Emily knew that if James appeared before her, he would surely hate her. And now, it seemed she was right. Emily cried her heart out. Before she could compose herself, she received a critical condition notice from Dr. Smith.
Miss Emily, your father has been admitted to the ICU again. Have you raised the money for the surgery?
The last bit of color drained from Emily's face. She hadn't raised a single penny. Her father didn't have much time left.
Please do everything you can to save my father. I'll find a way to get the money. Don't worry.
Emily returned to the private room she had just left. She took a deep breath at the door and then pushed it open. But when she walked in, she was stunned. The room, which had only James in it earlier, now had several men. As Emily appeared, the previously lively room fell silent. Despite her disheveled appearance, her charm was undeniable, making her look even more pitiful. All the men's eyes greedily swept over her, wanting to see more. James noticed their expressions, his face darkening. He smirked, "Here to see me?" The others felt a bit awkward. James was a young leader in the business world, and the Thompson family was powerful. They couldn't compare, let alone compete with him.
No wonder you didn't want any of the ones we introduced earlier. You have such a gem.
James snorted coldly, not saying a word. He stared straight at Emily, his eyes full of amusement.
I want to continue the deal from earlier.
Emily had intended to ask if they could go somewhere else, but James, expressionless, said,
Then let's begin.
"Begin?" Emily couldn't believe it. Did James want her to do that in front of so many people?
What did you just say?
Do people like you have any self-respect? Don't make me repeat myself. I'll raise the money to $1 million.
His words were full of humiliation, and he looked at Emily with anger. How dare this woman come back? Emily's face twisted in pain, but thinking of her father, she nodded with tears in her eyes. She bit her lip and whispered,
Please, help me.
Emily's face was pale, and the overwhelming sense of humiliation was almost drowning her. But the man's thin lips moved, and he said,
Not enough.
What more do you want?
Tears fell as she spoke. She could see the mocking eyes of the others, their gazes almost burning her. Even in the most difficult times, Emily had never experienced such humiliation.
I'm starting to regret it. Someone like you would only dirty me. Why don't you say something to please me?
A bad feeling rose in Emily's heart. She never thought James would hate her so much.
What do you want me to do?
Let's hear you bark like a dog. Show me how far you'll go for money.
Emily felt her world collapsing. She cried, unable to speak, just shaking her head. Everyone else watched silently, their expressions full of amusement. Emily's heart was breaking. Facing humiliation from the man she loved most, no matter how strong she was, she couldn't bear it.
Listen to me, I have my reasons. You can't treat me like this.
James's gaze almost tore her apart.
Stop talking nonsense. Don't you want to make money? There's no room for negotiation here. Don't give me those lousy excuses. Do I look like someone easy to fool?
James's voice was hysterical, not believing a word Emily said, nor intending to give her a chance to explain.
You'll regret this. James, you'll regret this.
Emily whispered, tears falling continuously.
Bark! Bark like a dog for me.
Emily almost wanted to run out the door. She couldn't bear the humiliation, but thinking of her sick father, she had no choice.
Woof, woof. I beg you, James, please stop tormenting me.
James was shocked, speechless with anger. His jaw clenched tightly, wanting to devour this ungrateful woman.
For money, this woman would do anything. Even such humiliating things in front of so many people. He must have been blind to have liked her before.
James lost his sanity. Ignoring the people around, he tore Emily's clothes.
Fine. I'll fulfill your wish. Let's see how low you can sink.
James's eyes were red with rage. He only wanted to tear this woman apart to vent his anger.
Seeing the situation escalate, some people wanted to intervene, but James shouted angrily.
What are you looking at? Get out! Do you want a free show?
The crowd, terrified, left one by one.
With no one to disturb them, James became even more reckless.
Emily's face turned pale with pain. Even her heart felt like it was breaking. At that moment, she began to hate him.
James seemed tireless, tormenting Emily as if they were mortal enemies.
In the end, Emily's voice was hoarse, her tears dried up. She lay motionless on the sofa, her body covered in bruises. What should have been an act of love now felt utterly humiliating to Emily. James had already dressed, looking impeccable. Seeing Emily's tear-streaked face, he hesitated for a moment, feeling a brief softness.
Clean yourself up and get out. I never want to see you again.
Emily finally opened her eyes, her gaze calm.
Were you satisfied with my performance?
What do you mean?
You said if my performance satisfied you, you'd pay me more. How much will you give me now?
All she could think about was money.
Can't you think of anything else?
Emily's heart was already dead. All she wanted was to cure her father's illness.
You promised me. You can't go back on your word.
You're hopeless.
James took out a check, writing down an amount of $5 million, then threw it at Emily's face.
$5 million. Is that enough to buy you? Take your filthy money and get out of my life. Don't ever appear in front of me again.
Narrator, tone, sad Emily couldn't remember how she got back to the hospital. She felt as if her soul had left her body, and she was on the verge of collapse. When she saw her father, frail and bedridden, Emily finally came to her senses.
Doctor, tone, hopeful Miss Emily, the situation has stabilized. Do you have the money for the surgery? If so, we can schedule it in a few days.
As long as there was hope for her father's recovery, any hardship was worth it for Emily. Tears of relief fell from her eyes.
Emily, tone, relieved. I have it. Please, doctor, save my father.
She handed the check to the doctor, her hand trembling slightly. Despite the humiliation it represented, she was willing to do anything for her father's health. In the days that followed, Emily's life was calm and uneventful. James had told her to disappear from his world completely. So, she vanished quietly, just like she had 5 years ago. Narrator, tone, serious, but just when Emily thought everything was improving, a sudden misfortune struck like a bolt from the blue. On her way to buy something for her father, Emily inexplicably fainted by the roadside. A passerby took her to the hospital, where Emily learned she was nearly 2 months pregnant. The child was James's.
Emily, tone, sad. How could this happen? I can't keep this child.
Emily staggered, almost fainting again, her heart filled with sorrow and pain. She loved James deeply, and she loved their child too. But, she couldn't raise a child alone. Besides, the child's father was about to marry another woman. What kind of life would the child have? Before she could decide what to do about the baby, her father's doctor brought more bad news.
Doctor, tone, serious Miss Emily, please come back to the hospital. Your father is in trouble.
Emily felt as if she had been struck by lightning, unable to comprehend what the doctor was saying.
Doctor, tone, serious, your father has passed away in his hospital room.
Narrator, tone, sad, but everything had been fine when she left just a moment ago. How could this happen? She ran back to the hospital, refusing to believe it was true. But when she arrived, she found only a cold, lifeless body. Her father had really stopped breathing. The most despairing thing is when you think there's hope, reality hits you hard. Emily looked at her father's closed eyes, her heart aching beyond words, unable to speak, her sobs stifled. She knelt by the bed, clutching her father's hand, her heart filled with pain and regret. Tears flowed into her mouth, tasting bitter. Her father, who had been her only family, was gone. She blacked out and fainted. Emily's world had truly collapsed, leaving nothing behind. In a half-asleep state, Emily felt an overwhelming sadness, as if she were about to die. Tears slid from her eyes, filling her mouth with bitterness.
She struggled to stay asleep, but a sudden pain in her lower abdomen felt like something was being torn from her body. Cold instruments pressed against her belly, as if they were about to cut her open. Emily struggled to open her eyes. What she saw nearly made her soul leave her body. She was tied to a bed, her legs spread apart, and a doctor was holding a cold instrument, moving it between her legs. "What are you doing? Let me go!"
Miss, please cooperate. We're performing a procedure. If you keep moving, it will endanger you.
The doctor's voice was emotionless, like a cold machine. But to Emily, it was a thunderbolt.
What do you mean? Stop immediately.
Emily screamed in despair, struggling against their control. They were trying to perform a procedure on her while she was unconscious.
"Stop it! Do you hear me, you monsters?" Emily's eyes were red as she screamed.
Even if she didn't know what to do with the child inside her, she couldn't let anyone harm her baby. These people were outrageous. Emily struggled violently, finally breaking free from the restraints. She pushed the doctor away and ran out of the operating room. She leaned against the wall, sliding down weakly. What was happening? Where did these people come from, treating her like this? The suffocating despair surged again, blurring Emily's vision with tears. She desperately wished for someone to help her. Suddenly, footsteps echoed. A pair of high heels stopped in front of Emily.
Emily looked up through her tears and saw a face she never wanted to see again. "Why is it you?" Emily looked at the elegant woman in disbelief, trembling with fear.
It was James's mother, the one who had made Emily leave James.
I have only one thing to say today. I'll give you $5 million to leave my son.
The same old trick, with a domineering expression, she looked at Emily as if she were trash. Without a word, she took out a check and threw it in Emily's face.
Emily felt a mix of sorrow and anger. Without looking, she tore the check to pieces. "Get out of my way! Do you think I'll listen to you again?"
James's mother looked shocked.
Don't you love money? $5 million is much more than what I gave you 5 years ago. Don't be ungrateful.
"Money? What does money mean to me now? My father is gone, and no one can spend that money. Even if I had a fortune, I have no interest. I won't accept your deal. Get out of here. I never want to see you again."
Emily gritted her teeth, filled with helpless anger. She still feared this woman, who was ruthless and always had unexpected tricks.
It's not up to you. Whether you agree or not, you can't be with my son. And the child inside you must be taken care of.
Emily faced Mrs. Thompson with disbelief.
"Why do you even have to control this? This is my child. What right do you have to decide for me?"
My son's bloodline is not for you to bear. I'll give you 3 days to think it over. After 3 days, I want to see the result I expect.
After saying that, Mrs. Thompson left in a huff. Emily stood there, feeling as if she had fallen into an ice cave. The Thompson family was powerful and influential. This was their domain. What could she use to fight against them? But she was unwilling to let them easily take her child's life. There was still one person who could help her, James. Emily clung to this last hope and quickly dialed James's number.
Do you have time now? I want to see you.
After a while, a cold male voice came through the phone.
Say what you need to over the phone.
I'm pregnant.
Emily anxiously waited for James's response, hoping to seek his help. But to her surprise.
So the $5 million I gave you before wasn't enough? Now you want to trick me into giving you more money?
Emily's heart felt like it had been stabbed, the pain making it hard for her to speak.
No, it's not like that. I don't want your money, I just want.
Terminate the pregnancy. If what you say is true, then terminate the pregnancy.
Her mind went blank. The child's biological father didn't want him to come into this world.
James, you are so heartless.
Emily began to cry loudly. It seemed like she was shedding all the tears in her life over the past 2 days. Sure enough, it wasn't long before James appeared in the hospital.
I've arranged for Dr. Smith. Rest for a while and prepare for the procedure.
Emily was quickly taken away. She cried and shouted at James.
James! You're not human! Even a tiger doesn't harm its cubs! You're a monster!
Emily's desperate cries grew more distant. James stood there, his hands tightly clenched, but his face remained expressionless. After the procedure was completed, Dr. Smith came out to inform James.
Mr. Thompson, the procedure is done.
James nodded indifferently and took a few steps forward but soon collapsed, vomiting blood.
Mr. Thompson, what's wrong?
I'm fine. Where is she? I want to see her.
This didn't look like he was fine at all. But James was always firm in his decisions, and Dr. Smith didn't dare to disobey his orders, so he silently walked away. James felt a deep sorrow because his collapse reminded him that his body wouldn't hold out much longer. No one knew about this. He had at most 1 year left to live, and that was the best-case scenario. James's face showed a hint of a sorrowful smile. It was because he didn't have much time left that he acted so recklessly, coming back to find this heartless woman. But the child couldn't stay. After he died, no one would protect them. Emily, carrying his bloodline, would be torn apart by his family. James couldn't let her take such a dangerous risk, so the child had to be terminated. When Emily arrived, she saw the man who had been keeping vigil by the bedside. Her eyes reddened, almost tearing up, but she coldly questioned.
Why are you still here?
I can be wherever I want. What right do you have to interfere?
James remained as cold and unfeeling as ever, his lips curling in a sarcastic smile.
The child is gone, but don't worry, you'll have other children in the future.
Emily trembled, feeling a deep pain in her heart. She touched her flat abdomen, where there was nothing left. She held back her tears and coldly said,
Get out!
But James didn't leave. Instead, he took out a bill to humiliate her.
This is compensation for the procedure.
This time, it was $5 million. Emily saw the amount and laughed until she cried.
Do you really think everything I've done is for money?
Emily felt an overwhelming despair.
You want to know why I love money so much? Because my dad was sick, and now he's gone. Are you satisfied? I don't need to raise money for his treatment anymore, so I don't care about money. Take your filthy money and get out.
She tore the check into pieces and threw it at James's face, feeling a sense of relief. James was stunned, looking at her in disbelief.
What did you say?
What did I say? Can't you understand? I don't need your filthy money anymore. Get out.
Say it again!
James shouted, losing control.
I don't want your filthy money. Get out. Get out.
She picked up a pillow and started hitting James with it, without mercy. James stood still, letting her hit him. Emily, having just woken up, had no strength, and it didn't hurt him. Eventually, she tired herself out and fell asleep again. After leaving the room, James immediately called his assistant, Michael, and coldly ordered,
Investigate everything she's been through in the past 5 years, especially about her father.
Michael left to carry out the order. James then coughed up a mouthful of blood, the bright red color burning his eyes. His time was running out. He had to arrange everything before his final days, ensuring all his assets would go to Emily so she wouldn't be bullied after he was gone. That night, James ordered a month-long business trip abroad to discuss Thompson Group's affairs. Emily was taken to a secluded place under the pretense of recovering. When Emily woke up again, the man was gone. She wiped away her tears, thinking of her unborn child and her recently deceased father, and cried herself to sleep.
Where is James? I want to see him.
They remained silent, not answering her question. When she tried to leave, they stopped her.
Move aside, I want to go out.
No, Miss Emily. Mr. James said you need to rest here for a month and can't leave.
What did you say?
The men didn't answer and locked the door behind them. Emily collapsed on the bed, a pale, powerless smile on her face. She had been confined by James. How dare he?
Emily screamed for James, but the men said he was out of the country. She trembled with anger.
Why did he lock me up? This is too much.
No matter how much she cursed, they acted as if they couldn't hear her. Emily spent an entire month there. Her father had passed away, and his body was not yet cold. Emily couldn't even arrange a proper burial. She didn't even know where her father's body was. All of this was caused by James. He had kept Emily here for a whole month. Just when Emily was about to give up, James returned. He looked travel-worn, much thinner, and his face was haggard. Emily turned her eyes away, refusing to look at him. Her first words were,
Let me go.
Where to?
Where I go is none of your business.
James felt a dull pain in his heart. He couldn't stand her indifferent attitude. He approached Emily and grabbed her chin.
Tell me where you're going.
Of course, I'm going out to make money. What I do is none of your business. Our deal ended long ago, didn't it?
These were all words spoken out of spite. She just wanted to provoke James so he would let her go. Thinking about her father's unburied body and not knowing where it was, while she was trapped here, Emily felt heartbroken. She hadn't fulfilled her duties as a daughter in life or in death.
Make money? How can you be so low?
James's eyes seemed to blaze with anger, but Emily, her heart deadened, was no longer afraid of him.
Do you think the money you gave me is enough to satisfy me? You think you can imprison me? Dream on. Of course, I need to find many wealthy patrons. Who do you think you are?
Not enough to satisfy you?
Emily struggled hard, trying to break free from James's grip.
James's eyes suddenly turned cold.
If one of me isn't enough for you, how do you plan to find other patrons?
With that, he threw Emily onto the bed and followed her.
Don't touch me!
Since you despise me so much, let's see how you beg for me.
Emily's face turned pale. She tried to escape, but James held her leg. Emily looked weakly at the ceiling, remembering the excruciating pain. Afterwards, Emily finally came to her senses. Using her last bit of strength, she pushed the man away.
Get out!
James didn't look at her and stumbled out, as if he couldn't stand to stay a moment longer. His expression, as if he had seen a ghost, made Emily feel like discarded trash. Her heart ached as if it were bleeding. Emily stood on the verge of tears, her desperation evident.
I'm sorry, I just need 200,000. I don't need to sell myself.
James's voice suddenly rose, clearly displeased.
200,000. Emily, do you love money so much that you're willing to sacrifice your dignity?
He took off his sunglasses, revealing a handsome face.
James!
Emily's blood nearly froze. She turned to run, but James grabbed her hand and pulled her back, pressing her against the door.
Why run now that you're here? What? Did you spend all the money my mom gave you and now want to earn it yourself? Who's the unlucky guy you're trying to deceive this time?
His mocking words cut Emily deeply, like sharp knives.
Let me go! If I had known the client was you, I wouldn't have come here for anything.
Since you're here, don't think about leaving. Aren't you here to sell yourself? How can you leave without making a deal?
Emily looked at the man she loved deeply, tears streaming down her face. James's eyes seemed to be filled with overwhelming anger, ready to burst out at any moment. He kicked the door open. Inside, two women who were talking turned to look at him, their eyes filled with shock.
Did you hear that? This woman is only after money. She doesn't love you at all. Come home with me.
But James ignored her. He just stared at Emily with a bitter smile, his heart filled with sorrow.
Give me an explanation.
Emily's face was as pale as paper, and even her hands, clutching the bedsheet, were trembling.
Let me explain. I was just saying things out of anger.
As soon as Emily finished speaking, James erupted in fury.
Enough! His face was contorted with rage, and he had to restrain himself from hurting her. Do you think I still believe your lies? Emily, I just want to see what your heart is made of. I treated you so well, but you discarded my sincerity like it was nothing. What do you want? Money?
Emily shook her head, tears falling. Just moments ago, she thought her heart was already dead, but now, facing James's questioning, she felt fear. She worried that he had heard what she said and misunderstood her again.
When I ran away from home with nothing, you shared your meal with me when I was starving. Where did that kind and pure person go?
James's eyes reddened, whether from anger or sadness, it was hard to tell. He pointed to a scar on his chest. Do you remember this? When you were cornered by thugs, who risked their life to protect you. It was me. I was willing to give up my life for you, so why are you treating me like this? After trampling on his sincerity, she treated him like a commodity, measuring his worth in money. That was Emily. The woman he foolishly fell in love with. Emily was already sobbing uncontrollably. She held James's hand.
Listen to me, it's not what you think. Please, give me another chance.
How could Emily forget those moments? When she was sick, it was James who braved the rain to take her to the hospital. James, who always put her first. But now, it was all in the past. James closed his eyes, a tear slipping down. With all his strength, he said.
Leave. I don't want to see you again. I'm letting you go, so please let me go too.
After speaking, James ignored the shocked and pained look on Emily's face and walked out.
His mother followed, beaming with joy. This woman had driven her son away. How could she not be happy?
Son, I told you, a woman with a heart like hers could never be sincere. If you had listened to me earlier and left her, it would have been better.
Hearing the glee in her voice, James's face darkened further. He suddenly stared at his mother and coldly said,
I don't think any mother would be concerned with anything else after hearing her son took a knife for someone. You never considered me your son, did you?
Mrs. Thompson was stunned, unable to say a word.
James sneered and walked away quickly. His mother was worse than Emily. At least Emily was honest about loving money and nothing else. But his mother wanted money and power while pretending to care about family, which was terrifyingly hypocritical.
The two most important women in his life had each wounded him deeply. James thought, even if his illness hadn't taken his life, his heart was already dead. James went to the bathroom and became ill. He smiled bitterly, having lost the will to live, and soon passed out.
When he woke up 2 days later, his mother was by his side.
Why did you hide such a big thing from me? She demanded as soon as she saw James awake. Do you know this illness can be fatal? Why didn't you undergo treatment?
James's heart skipped a beat, knowing he could no longer hide his illness. He hadn't expected this day to come so soon.
The chances of successful treatment are low. I don't want to do something uncertain, he said coldly, as if discussing someone else's life and death.
Mrs. Thompson's face turned pale with anger. She scolded, Do you think you can make such a decision on your own? Don't forget, you're the heir to the Thompson Group. If something happens to you, it will be a disaster for all of us.
James suddenly looked at her, his eyes unfamiliar as if he didn't recognize her.
So your son is on the brink of death, and all you care about is the Thompson Group? You never saw me as your son, I'm just a tool to you. So why should I tell you anything?
James's heart ached as if it were bleeding.
Mrs. Thompson was shocked. How can you talk to me like that?
She was heartbroken and quickly gave an order. I'll contact the best doctor in the country to arrange surgery for you immediately.
No one can force me to do what I don't want to do. If you push me, I won't wait for the illness to spread. I can end it right in front of you now.
He spoke decisively, showing no concern for his own life.
Mrs. Thompson, both angry and sad, slammed the door and left.
When James was alone in the room, he collapsed. Even the only person he cared about, Emily, had abandoned him. What was the point of living? It would be better to end the suffering. James laughed silently, his eyes filled with indescribable sorrow. Soon, there was a knock on the door.
Sir, it's me.
James didn't even have the strength to sit up. He weakly said, "Come in." The assistant looked anxious, holding a document. "Sir, the matter you asked me to investigate has results. There might have been a misunderstanding about Miss Emily."
He immediately sat up, asking, What do you mean?
He looked at the assistant nervously, realizing that despite their estrangement, anything related to Emily still affected him deeply.
James thought he was pathetic. Despite how she treated him, he still couldn't forget her.
The assistant placed the document in front of James. 5 years ago, it was actually Mrs. Thompson who threatened Miss Emily. Her father was in the late stages of illness and needed a large sum for treatment. Mrs. Thompson said that if Miss Emily didn't leave you, no hospital would treat her father. So
she had no choice but to say those things. She really had her reasons. James quickly flipped through the documents, finally piecing together the events of the past 5 years.
That woman had hidden so much from him. James's heart was in turmoil. Before he could finish reading, the documents fell from his hands.
Bring that woman to me.
The tension in the room was palpable as Michael hesitated.
Sir, Miss Emily left here the day before yesterday.
What did you say?
James trembled, trying to stand up but lacked the strength.
No, I have to find her. I need to bring her back now.
But before he could, he stumbled and fell back onto the bed.
Sir, let me handle finding her. You need to rest here. Isprinajuaneneus.
But for James, the most urgent thing was to see Emily.
Prepare the car immediately, and don't tell Mrs. Thompson. We're going out to find her.
As the two were at an impasse, Mrs. Thompson, who had left earlier, suddenly returned. But this time, she brought someone with her. It was the still-living former chairman of the Thompson family, James's grandfather.
You ungrateful child. Do you not understand the severity of your condition? Are you trying to end your life?
Seeing his grandfather, James finally calmed down, but his eyes were filled with stubborn defiance.
She is more important to me than anything. And the doctor said that even with surgery and treatment, the success rate is less than 30%. You all are business people who understand weighing risks and benefits. Such a small chance of success isn't worth the risk.
Foolishness. If you dare leave this place today, I'll disown you as my grandson.
James had 1 foot out of the hospital room but stopped at these words. He frowned deeply and bowed to the old man.
I'm sorry, Grandpa. My time is running out. I must find her. If I don't, I won't rest in peace.
With that, he ran out. Grandpa Thompson fainted from anger. Emily brought her father's body back from the morgue, cremated it, and then buried him in their hometown. It took her a month to lay him to rest, and she felt guilty, kneeling at his grave and crying bitterly. All the important things in her life were gone. Love, family, nothing was left. Emily stood expressionless for a while, but suddenly heard footsteps. She turned to see James's assistant.
What does James want now?
Miss Emily, Mr. James has collapsed. You need to come with me.
What are you talking about?
Mr. James is in the late stages of stomach cancer. We came to find you, but his condition worsened on the way, and he collapsed. He's unconscious in the car. You need to come with us to the hospital. He won't undergo surgery without you.
What did you say?
How could this be? He seemed fine the last time she saw him. The assistant grabbed her arm and led her to the car. By the time Emily realized what was happening, they were back at the hospital. James lay on the bed, emaciated. Emily couldn't hold back her tears, clutching his hand and crying.
Why didn't you tell me sooner?
All her previous resentment vanished in the face of death. She just wanted James to live. Hearing her cries, James slowly opened his eyes. He reached out to wipe her tears but had no strength.
Don't cry. It's good that you finally came to see me.
His voice was weak, completely different from his usual strong tone. How did it come to this? It had only been a few days.
Please, don't be stubborn. Get the treatment. You have a long way to go. Please, undergo the surgery.
James remained silent. He couldn't even move his fingers to hold her.
I'm afraid if I undergo surgery, I won't wake up and see you again.
Emily was stunned, looking at James in disbelief. This one sentence meant more to her than any sweet words. They still loved each other.
It's okay. I'll stay with you, whether the surgery succeeds or fails.
James's eyes brightened slightly.
I misunderstood you before. If I undergo the surgery, Will you forgive me and come back to me?
Emily nodded, then threw herself into James's arms, crying.
Okay, I agree, but you must never leave me again.
Emily gave him the courage. James felt that even if he didn't wake up, having Emily by his side for this last journey would be worth it. Before entering the operating room, James was still holding Emily's hand, his gaze filled with longing.
Her heart ached, wishing she could go in with him.
Don't leave, wait for me to wake up. His grip on her hand was so tight that it hurt Emily.
Emily forced a smile, watching as the operating room door closed. From morning till night, the surgery didn't stop. Emily paced anxiously.
Emily, you should get something to eat.
Initially, she refused, but to wait for James to wake up, she left the hospital.
It was past 7 p.m., and the street lights were dim. The surrounding darkness felt eerie. Worried about James, Emily didn't notice anything unusual, nor did she see someone following her. As she turned a corner, she felt a sharp pain at the back of her head and lost consciousness. Emily didn't even have time to scream. When she woke up, the sun was high, and she was in an abandoned warehouse. She could hear the sound of the sea nearby. Emily was tied up and couldn't move. Fear filled her heart as she wondered who was targeting her. Soon, the tightly closed door was pushed open.
It's you?
Since you refuse to leave James with the money, I'll make sure you leave forever.
Are you crazy? This is a crime. Cold sweat dripped from Emily as she tried to move towards the door, but she was tightly bound and couldn't escape.
I'll throw you into the sea to feed the fish. No one will ever know it was me.
No. Are you insane? She screamed in terror, her body trembling with fear.
Just when she saw a glimmer of hope, was fate really not allowing them to be together? She cried bitterly, but Mrs. Thompson showed no mercy. She took out a handkerchief and covered Emily's mouth, making her lose all strength and consciousness. Then, there was the sound of the door being broken down. Emily closed her eyes in despair, calling James's name over and over in her heart. This time, she would break her promise. In a dimly lit room, tension hung in the air like a heavy curtain.
I'm sorry, I just need 200,000. I don't need to sell myself.
200,000.
James's voice suddenly rose, clearly displeased.
Emily, do you love money so much that you're willing to sell yourself?
He took off his sunglasses, revealing a handsome face. It was James.
Blood nearly froze in her veins. She turned to run, but James grabbed her hand and pulled her back, pressing her against the door.
Why run now that you're here? His eyes narrowed dangerously as he sneered. What? Did you spend all the money my mom gave you and now want to earn it yourself? Who's the unlucky guy you're trying to deceive this time?
His mocking words cut Emily deeply, like sharp knives.
Let me go! If she had known the client was James, she wouldn't have come here for anything.
Since you're here, don't think about leaving. He reached out and grabbed her. Aren't you here to sell yourself? How can you leave without making a deal?
Emily looked at the man she loved deeply, tears streaming down her face. The next day, when Emily opened her eyes, she saw James's handsome face close to hers.
Emily, everything is in the past now. For the rest of my life, I want to be with you and our child, never to be apart.
It turned out that after Emily fell asleep, Grandpa Thompson had told James about her pregnancy. Emily reached out and wrapped her arms around James's neck, responding to his passionate kiss. They kissed for a long time until someone knocked on the door, and they finally separated. Emily adjusted her clothes before opening the door. Grandpa Thompson, supported by the butler, walked in, looking much more relaxed.
You rascal, hurry up and get well. The whole company is waiting for you.
Grandpa, I have something to tell you.
What good news could you possibly have?
As soon as I fully recover, I want to marry Emily.
Hearing James's statement, which sounded more like a notification than a request, Grandpa Thompson couldn't help but get angry.
What if I don't agree?
Hearing Grandpa Thompson's words, Emily bit her lip and lowered her head, saying nothing.
Then I'll move out.
You ungrateful child. Are you trying to cut ties with me?
The butler, knowing that both of them were stubborn, quickly intervened to prevent a quarrel.
Young master, Grandpa Thompson has already chosen the wedding venue for you. You don't need to worry.
What nonsense are you talking about? Why would I do such a thing?
The butler scratched his head, looking puzzled.
Didn't you say you had your eye on a place for the little master's full moon celebration?
Exposed, Grandpa Thompson's face turned a bit red. He glared at James and angrily said,
Marry if you want. Don't live here if you don't want to. Out of sight. Out of mind.
With that, Grandpa Thompson left the room.
Grandpa is just like that. You'll get used to it.
After a month of recovery, James couldn't wait to be discharged.
A week of preparations later, the wedding was held at the largest hotel under the Thompson Group. When the time came, James watched from afar as Emily walked towards him, his heart filled with sweetness.
Emily, I will never let go of your hand.
After exchanging rings, they shared a sweet kiss, earning applause from everyone present.
This grand wedding was talked about for a long time. Many people speculated about what Emily had done to make James so devoted, giving her such a dreamlike wedding.
8 months later, a baby's cry was heard in the delivery room. When the nurse brought the baby out, James didn't even look at him before handing him to Grandpa Thompson. He rushed inside.
Emily lay on the hospital bed, exhausted. Seeing James rush in, she smiled at him.
Emily, you've worked hard. We'll only have this one child, no more.
Didn't you once swear you'd have many children with me? Why the change now?
One little rascal is enough. When he grows up, we'll hand the Thompson Group to him, and I'll take you to travel the world.
With James by her side, Emily felt very secure. She rested her head on his arm and fell into a deep sleep. Outside the room, the little one, sensing his father's betrayal, cried even louder in Grandpa Thompson's arms.